All right, here we are, hour number 2 on a Buffalo Football Tuesday. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you, and going to be joined now by ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, whose appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. And Dan was in the building last night calling the game for ESPN with Louis Riddick and Chris Fowler. And, when we talked to you last week, Dan, we expressed some concern about the individual matchups that Atlanta could put on the field offensively, and they were a monumental problem in the first half. The defense for the Bills did kind of curtail things in the second half, but, man, it was a major problem in the first half and took a while for the Bills to adjust.
Yeah, really from first play of the game, and it's that first play of the game kind of tells the story of the night. It also kind of tells the story of the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. Atlanta comes out and Bijan rips off, I don't know, what would have been an 8 or 10-yard run, and the ball pops out. And it's recovered by Buffalo. And so on one part, you're like, there it is. There's the takeaway that has kind of avoided the team recently defensively. But they line up off sides. So the penalty shows itself. I think they had 8 or 9 of them last night. So that, again, was something that was an issue for their football team last night. But also it was the foreshadowing in the precursor of Atlanta's ability to run the football and willingness to run the football last night. And so, just early on in that game, they really struggled with, being really gap sound defensively in the run game, shedding blocks and getting off blocks, and not allowing, they got very much so at the defensive line expanded. They were stretched so much sideline to sideline that there were those big seams. Now, Atlanta did a nice job of running towards the safety a lot, and that safety's taking on offensive linemen. That's not a good thing. But it was a very impressive performance by Atlanta's run game early on, and even their pass game, attacking some of the zone coverages and whatnot. And, that was the fear going into it if you were a Bills fan, is realizing how talented Atlanta was offensively. And if they got out of their own way in many ways, that they were the team, at least unit-wise, that had the advantage and, very much so in the first half dominated Buffalo.
Give us an idea of, kind of articulate what you can discern about Buffalo's defensive game plan against a team like Atlanta. You knew Bijan Robinson was going to be the centerpiece. What was Buffalo's plan going in? Zone man, pressure, not pressure?
Yeah, not much pressure. So early on, it was their traditional zone defense, and they were trying to drop down that safety late to get him into the box. And, when you're Atlanta, you're in many ways, you're trying to have those cans or check with me's, and they're not necessarily going past the run or run the pass. They're a little bit more of which way they want to run, and they always wanted to run towards that weak safety. And so their outside zone was going to the weak safety. If you look at a lot of their big runs, it's when the safety was dropping down and they were getting their offensive linemen blocking a safety. Again, big people beat up little people. And so I think they were trying to figure out Buffalo defensively what was going to work. There was also the reality, and these aren't excuses, they're just real, is Daquan goes down pregame. So, okay, you get one starter back, a starter goes away. Bernard got banged up relatively early in the game. And so you're playing with a couple different pieces, specifically in your run game, that maybe, I don't know if Milano's in there, are they asking Milano to be the guy that fits the run backside more so than the backside safety? And so there was a little bit of personnel disadvantage for Buffalo. And so I think they got better after half. Sean McDermott at half, they said they got to be a lot better in the gaps. And so they were, and a lot of those runs that they stopped were really good at, like, hey, hold it front side and get through backside. They played a lot more man. I thought their man coverage actually held up pretty well. Their zone got ate up pretty good. And so I thought the adjustments, were definitely something to, if you're trying to find silver lining, to pay attention to.
How do they – is it just – because we've talked about this, Dan. It just seems as though the defensive staff is hamstrung by being so short on manpower. I mean, think about their draft class alone. They draft 2 corners. Both of them are on IR. Like, they're not even a part of the equation. They're not getting experience because they're hurt. And then TJ Sanders, their second-round pick, is on IR now. Like, that's 3 of their draft choices that can't even get on the field because they're hurt. And then, to your point, they lose Daquan. They don't have Milano. And they lose more guys last night. It's just, I don't know. It just seems like an avalanche of injuries. How much does that handcuff a play caller?
Yeah, a lot. We saw it on the offensive side last night as well. And if you were just taking the non-emotional step back and unbiased, biased, fan, not fan, there is the reality that every team deals with injuries, and that is next man up. And yes, that is absolutely fair. But when you have a first and second round draft pick that hasn't really played or have not really played, well, do they impact your defense a lot? Do they impact your defense a little bit? Are they is Hairston a lockdown corner? Does that allow a little bit more freedom in the secondary? Is Sanders a dominant run stopping defensive tackle? Is he, so you just don't know exactly where you are as a defense without those 2 guys, and then Milano and then Terrell going down. So, my takeaway as a whole, I think they're down 8 starters 5 minutes into the game last night. So we can be objective and real and say, okay, yes, you're concerned that the defense has given up so many explosive runs. Do those missing pieces make you feel that will be minimized? Yes, unknown. If we're being completely honest, the coaching staff probably has a better idea. And then I think we saw it offensively as well, where I said it during the broadcast. Joe Brady's looking at his call sheet going, okay, how many plays can I run with 2 tight ends and a fullback on the field? Because that's kind of what it became for them offensively.
Yeah, offensively, the Bills, they struggled to protect. Certainly it was the plan of Atlanta to send some pressure and cover them up in the back end. What were your thoughts about how Buffalo's offense struggled? They came out in the first drive of the game. Yeah, that was good. Then they came out first drive of the second half. Yeah, that was good. In between, there was a lot of problems.
Yeah, I would tell you, one, I was really surprised at the lack of James Cook usage and touches. When it became obvious pregame, no Dalton, no Curtis, Josh goes down. All right, well, who are our best players? I mean, they run their offense through Kincaid, Shakir, and Cook to begin with. So when one of those guys is in, those second and third pieces aren't there, it's like, how many different plays can we just call for Khalil Shakir and James Cook? And it was odd to see in a situation where this team has been so disciplined at being committed to owning the line of scrimmage and coming off of a game when they didn't against New England, really not lean into that. And it became a little bit of a pass fest, and it played to the advantage of Atlanta. And Atlanta just said, after Josh's touchdown pass to start that game in the first drive, and he had all day, Atlanta was like, that's not happening anymore. We're just going to go after him. And then, I do think a disappointing takeaway is, and I don't know how much, but it's disappointing that Keon Coleman doesn't have the opportunity and doesn't step up. I don't know if it was they don't believe in him. I don't know if he's not going to them in those moments saying, get me the ball. I talked about it last night that I was surprised they weren't moving him opposite A.J. Terrell and trying to get him the football, throw the ball downfield to him and opportunities just to use his big body and frame. And I think, again, you're taking a step away offensively and going, you're missing all those pieces. Do I think that Joe Brady probably got too cute at times? No doubt. That 3rd-and-1 jet sweep, don't run that. You're too good of a play caller. You're too good of an offensive line. You run behind your offensive line and say, we're going to run this twice, guys. If we don't get it, we don't deserve to win. But I think a lot of the injuries are a huge part of that. But, if I was a Bills fan, I would have loved to see Keon Coleman step to the forefront and impact that game much, much, much more than he did.
He was a guy, Dan, that was used in the slot at Florida State a good deal. He has been used inside there sparingly, and it's probably due to the fact that Kincaid and Shakir usually operate in those areas. Yeah. But absent Kincaid, and we don't know how long he may or may not be out, but is that something to explore? Could it facilitate him being more of a factor in the passing game going forward, and maybe just explain how it might help open up his opportunities.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's a great point, and absolutely should be explored. One of the things that he was so great at as well at Florida State was just put the football in his hands. He was an elite returner. And so naturally, when you're in the slot, you get a little bit more of the ball quickly because of just the space of a defense. There is the reality. You mentioned Kincaid, Shakir. You want those guys in the side. If it's not Kincaid, does Keon going down there? But then who goes on the outside? That a little bit is how healthy is Palmer? What's his injury off of last night? Shavers did some decent things with some opportunity. And so, I'm not pressing the panic button, and I'm really not. But I do think moving him inside and just, maybe he's one of those guys that you got to get him the ball early on. And we talked to Joe about this because, you as a play caller, I would imagine you want to make sure that all those pieces are getting the ball early. You almost want everybody to get a touch early so they feel like they're in the game. But then you want your best players to get the touches early. So do you live in the world where I want Shakir to get 3 touches in the first quarter, but then does Keon not get one? And so maybe just getting Keon some touches, some easy baked in touches, a little bit like they do with Khalil early on in games, is something that they have to look into. Curtis not there. Those are usually Curtis's. So, I just, I'm not trying to not take away from a poor offensive performance, but I think when you go into a game and you think X is the plan, and then the plan takes a hit pregame, and then the plan takes a hit in your second drive of the game, that package of plays gets shrunk down big time.
How do you handle, and what's your plan if you're McDermott and the coaching staff handle these bye weeks? You've just had 2 games where, one, you didn't play your best, but you still feel like you gave the game away. Then last night you feel like, man, you just got beat. That's a little different loss than it was against the Patriots 2 weeks ago. What's your plan, and what's your attitude headed into this bye week as a coaching staff?
Yeah, so we actually asked Sean about that in kind of 2 parts. Number one, Coach, coming off of a game against New England where very uncharacteristic performance, what was the message to the team? Did you make it a big deal, the turnovers and penalties? Did you not? Did you avoid it? Did you? And he said, no. Like, they live in truth. But it was something that they just process constantly, emphasized and whatnot. They didn't run from it, but they didn't make it this giant mountain. Well, now it's, kind of 2.5, almost 3 games in a row where turnovers and penalties. So I do think it's probably something that you have to take a step back and go, we were really good at these things. Why aren't we in the last 3 weeks? 30 penalties in 3 weeks. I don't care how good you are. You're swimming upstream. So having the conversation as a staff of what's going on, why is it going on? Are we avoiding things in practice? Is there something that has to get emphasized more in practice because you get what you emphasize? And he even said to us himself, he really believed this 2-week stretch starting last night, this week, and the bye week is going to be really big for this team. And because the point of the 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year's team is very different than this year's team. This is obviously a different group. And so how does this team handle adversity of last week's loss? Obviously 2 losses in a row. How do they handle getting punched in the mouth? How do they handle, physically getting beat up? How do they handle the injuries? And so I think that those are 2 of the big things that, they have to figure out and address and have long looks in the mirror about, both as staff and plan and players, is how do they, take these 2 losses, learn from them to really go on the run that, a lot of people expect them to.
Last one from me, Dan. Coach McDermott and his staff harp on the fundamentals both verbally and in practice. I mean, we see them.
Yeah.
Preach and practice fundamentals ad nauseum every single week. And for some reason, it's not translating to the game field. And I'm not here to say it's not getting through to the players, but there's a disconnect somewhere. Where does the player-driven leadership step in and maybe assist the coaching staff to get it through to the players that are not executing the all-important fundamentals that has made this team so successful for so many years.
Yeah, Chris, I'm not there every day. My just takeaway of obviously following the team and being a part of this and calling games over the years is like, I would be shocked if that's not already there. I would be very surprised if that player-led leadership, hasn't voiced things over the past couple of weeks and, hasn't and will and won't do it more so in the next 2 weeks. I really think that this is a unique team when it comes to that stuff. And so they've got so many veteran players and so many highly successful and accomplished guys. I would imagine that's already a part of the thing. And this is why we asked Coach McDermott and we asked Joe and Bobby. It was like, when it comes to these things that have been trademarks of your organization and it goes off the wheels, you can make it too big of a deal and then you could avoid it. And so it's that very fine line. And I'm not smart enough to know exactly how to grease it, but it's that very fine line of addressing it and understanding that it's 100% their reality in the last 2.5 weeks or so, while also not world is ending, we got to change everything, panic, oh my gosh, season is over. I think that's going to be the real direct challenge for that football team.
Thanks,
all right,
Dan.
Thanks very much for the time. We appreciate it as always. We'll catch up with you next week.
Thanks, guys.